here from the Next Issue Podcast. On today's video, I'll be doing a review for the book Spider-Man Live Story. Now, there's a few reasons I'm making a video for this book. First of all, it's an incredible book. We'll get into that during the review. But with the release of Across the Spider-Verse, I thought it would be really fun to talk about some Spider-Man comics. Also, we just read this for our local book club. So I had just read this, so I went back, revisited the material. So we had a really interesting conversation, and it just really prompted in me wanting to do this video. So let's talk about the creative team here first. This is written by Chip Zdarsky with pencils by Mark Bagley, inks by John Dell, colors by Frank Darmada, and letters by Travis Lanham. The premise of this book follows it's like a what if scenario of like, what if Spider-Man lived out his life actually aging through the decades. So each issue, it's a 6-issue series with an annual one shot at the end that follows Spider-Man through the decades from the 60s all the way to the 2010s. But what if he really, like, he aged like a normally, as opposed to remaining, the ever so youthful Peter Parker that we know from the comics. Uh, and yeah, like, how would his life have played out? A lot of those stories that we know from each of those decades are revisited, but we'll get into it. So yeah, as I mentioned, this book by the talented Chip Zdarsky, like, it is incredible, and brought to life by the remarkable artistry of Mark Bagley, one of the, if not the definitive Spider-Man artist. You could definitely make an argument for that. It's an extraordinary comic book that offers fans a fresh introspective into the iconic superhero journey. With its innovative storytelling approach and reverence for Spider-Man's rich history, this limited series stands out as a true gem in the Marvel Universe. This is a very recent book, which is amazing. One of the most captivating aspects of this book, it's the way it reimagines Peter Parker's life and highlights the effects of the time on his superhero career. Instead of presenting a static timeline, Zdarsky cleverly ages Peter in real time, taking readers through the decades from the 60s to present day. This narrative device allows us to follow and witness the emotional and physical toll that the years of crime fighting can take on our beloved hero, adding depth and realism to this story. I think it's really fun because we get to see a lot of the big stories that we know for Spider-Man through the decades, right? Of course, his encounters with the Green Goblin. We get to see Secret Wars and how that plays out into it. We get to see some characters. There's a whole thing about the Vietnam War and how Peter struggles with him. Should he intervene? Is that something that he should get involved in? Also, like how other heroes respond to those kinds of things, like Captain America. And we just kind of followed him through the decades, right? Whether you like some of the things or not, I think these take a really interesting approach. We get to revisit the Clone Saga from the 90s, the Inheritors from the 2010s, even get to see Miles Morales towards the end of the issue, but how all that stuff would have played in a universe where Peter has aged from the 60s to the now, including some of his most amazing stories like Kraven's Last Hunt. Like, all that stuff is in there. It's a very rich lore. There's a lot of lore in this book. So I think it's one of its strengths and maybe even one of its weaknesses at the same time, because if you're not a person who's very well versed in Spider-Man lore, you may not recognize some of these stories, and it may even feel a little bit confusing. But I was familiar with a lot of these stories, whether I've read them in the comics or they've been adapted to, specifically the animated show from the 90s. A lot of the stories are adapted in there. And then by the time I started reading comics, I've been kind of caught up on really most of that mythology. So that was really interesting. So Darsky's writing just shines through the pages, capturing the essence of Peter Parker's character. He weaves together personal struggles, societal changes, and iconic events that create a seamless narrative that feels very genuine and heartfelt. As I mentioned, the Vietnam War, even touching on the impact of September 9/11 in 2001, It tackles a lot of those things and how not only Spider-Man but other heroes are affected by that. I think Mark Bagley's artwork is a visual feast for the eyes, perfectly complementing the storytelling. Bagley's illustrations are dynamic. His attention to detail brings each era to life with very expressive character movements, character designs, whether it's swinging to action sequences or the more quiet moments of introspection between these characters. Bagley's art just really brings to life and captures the essence of this world of Spider-Man. I think it's really interesting that uh, Bagley manages to adapt his artwork throughout the story. Also, the coloring also changes throughout each book a little bit to try to reflect a little bit more of the art of the time. It would have been interesting, and this is something we discussed at book club. I think it would have been interesting to also have a different artist for each decade to try to evoke more of that feeling of that specific decade. But Bagley is an excellent artist that manages to do a very similar thing to, he's not really mimicking artwork, but he's also just trying to adapt his artwork to each decade as we kind of go in there. And as I mentioned, the coloring as well changes a little bit. So beyond this engaging story and artwork, Spider-Man's life story also excels in paying homage to the character's extensive history. Long-line fans will be delighted by the numerous references, Easter eggs, all sprinkled throughout the series, celebrating key moments from Spider-Man's past and honoring the work of those creators that came before. So, as I mentioned, this is a very fun book for somebody that's steeped in the lore of Spider-Man. Whether you like some of the stories or not, this is a new version of a lot of those events. But they also have a very similar flavor. You can kind of tell also which one of them are Zdarsky's maybe preferred stories as you kind of spend a little bit more time with that. So overall, this is a really fun experiment. I know that Marvel also did one for the Fantastic Four, which I haven't read. I'll take a look at it if I enjoy it enough, or if there's enough for me to talk about. I'll probably make another video. But yeah, I think they Marvel brought together a really great team of people that respect and also are talented enough to bring this story to life. And they managed to deliver a compelling and emotionally resonant story. So whether you're a lifelong fan of Spider-Man or even somebody that's more recent, I wouldn't say totally. I don't think this is as new reader friendly as some of the other stuff, but I think this is a story that if you really want to know what the true core of Spider-Man and the character has been through the decades, this is a great place to read, especially if you are diving into the comics to learn more about the characters as we get these upcoming films. You know, the Cross Spider-Verse, and we just had the Spider-Man film last year. So like as you're trying to, if you're looking for more of that stuff, I think this is a great place to start because you'll get to see so many iconic villains, so many interesting storylines that may want to make you go back and read those actual storylines from the comics at the time. Now granted, the Clone Saga is like a 2-year event, so maybe that's not something that you can go back and revisit so easily. But Kraven's Last Hunt is pretty compact. Everything with the Inheritors and the Spider Verse, like even though we don't touch on that stuff, the run of the Superior Spider-Man, like all those little references are crammed in here in such a cool way that it seems very effortless. Chip Zdarsky also did uh, another book, Spider's Shadow, which is also about a kind of a what if story, which I'll probably check out as well. I might make a second video for that. So let me know in the comments if that's something you'd watch. And let me know if you have read this book. What did you think about it? So, as always, thank you for watching, everyone. Remember to share, like, subscribe, hit the bell so you know when we go live. Uh, there will be more comic reviews, trailer reactions, TV recaps, all that fun stuff here on the channel. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone. Bye bye.